Great Britain. You wouldn't think by looking at the pictures in the headlines, but this was once the center of the Western world. And it might surprise you to learn that the current state of Britain is not in fact the exception, but the rule itself. For the need of the British to sabotage themselves and return to Mud Hut is deeply ingrained in their national psyche. But was it always this way? Were the Brits always doomed to vandalize their own great cities while waving the flags of their enemies? Were they always this self-destructive and barbaric? Yes. Well, there was a golden age that lasted from the 1st century until this creature you see before you clawed his way out of Aelia Flacilia's moldy uterus, but that's a story for another time. But what about before that shining golden era, you ask? Well, Centurion, to find out we're going to have to go back to a dark time in European history, the time before Julius Caesar's arrival in Britain, when wild animals known as Celts entertained each other by stuffing as many people as they could into wicker men before burning them alive. You might know that Caesar spent a significant portion of his commentaries talking about the ethnography and culture of both Gauls and Germans. And fortunately for us, good listener, though Britain played a less important role in the Gallic War, he did not neglect to talk about the island and its inhabitants, their culture and style of warfare. Britannia, like its Gallic neighbor to the south, was a land of multiple tribes in a state of constant warfare. Caesar does not take the time to name them all, nor should he, but we do get a few, including the Seni-Magni, Bibroci, and the Trinobantes, who played a very important role as an ally of the Romans during Caesar's expedition. Caesar says the following of the inhabitants of Britain. The inland regions of Britain are inhabited by people whom the Britons themselves claim, according to oral tradition, are indigenous. The coastal areas belong to people who once crossed from Belgium in search of booty and war. Almost all of these inhabitants are called by the same national name as those of the states they originally came from. After waging war, they remained in Britain and began to farm the land. Population density is high, and their dwellings are extremely numerous, and very like those of the Gauls. They have large herds of cattle. They use either bronze or gold coinage, or, instead of currency, iron rods of a fixed weight. Tin is found in the Midland regions, iron along the coast, but only in small quantities. Their bronze is imported. They consider it wrong to eat hare, chicken, or goose, but still they look after them for pleasure and amusement. Of the island's inhabitants, by far the most civilized are those who live in Kent, a region which is entirely coastal. Their way of life is much the same as that of the Gauls. Inland, the people for the most part do not plant crops, but live on milk and meat and clothe themselves in animal skins. All Britons paint themselves with woad, which produces a dark blue color. By this means they appear more frightening in battle. They have long hair and shave their bodies all except the top of their head and upper lip. Groups of 10 or 12 men share their wives in common, particularly between brothers or father and son. Any offspring they have are held to be the children of him whom the maiden was first brought. Similar to Gaul, there was no united Britannic identity, and the tribes were unable to maintain even the loosest of confederacies to withstand the might of the legion. While Caesar only names a few of the major players in Britain, 2 of them were significant, and give us a peek into the political situation on the island of the 1st century BC. The first was Cassivellaunus, a king of an unnamed tribe in the region north of the Thames River. Caesar says that between the other tribes and Cassivellaunus there had been continual war, but the arrival of the Romans had frightened his enemies into creating a temporary alliance with him. Some misguided listeners might see Cassivellaunus as a sort of Britannic Vercingetorix, bravely holding the line against the onslaught of Roman expansionism. I assure you, however, Centurions, that just like his Gallic counterpart, Cassivellaunus was nothing but a warlord and a terrorist of the peoples of Britannia. Which brings us nicely to our next major player, the prince in exile, Mandubracius. Hailing from the Trinobantes, Mandubracius' father was brutally deposed and murdered by Cassivellaunus long before Caesar ever set foot in the Britannic coast. His life being in great danger, the prince fled to Gaul, where he chanced upon Caesar and approached him looking for support. Caesar, who spent his own youth on the run from Sulla's prescriptions, felt sympathy for the prince, and his plea for aid gave him an avenue to peaceful relations with at least one of the tribes in the area. After fending off several attacks by Cassivellaunus, Caesar was able to make contact with the Trinobantes, who asked him to return Mandubracius so he could take his place on the throne. In doing this, they cemented their friendship with the Roman people by providing Caesar's army with hostages and a food supply. Immediately after, seeing that Caesar was quick to make peace and establish friendly relations with the locals, 5 other tribes immediately approached Caesar and were received in friendship. In addition, they provided the proconsul with vital information on the location of Cassivellaunus' stronghold and its numbers. Not long after, the fighting concluded, and Cassivellaunus was forced to come to terms. Caesar's departure from Britain would spell an end of Roman involvement in the British Isles for another century, during which time the native way of life continued uninterrupted. It was not until the ascension of Claudius that the now Roman Empire would return to reassert itself in the region. And while Britain would thrive under the Pax Augusta, like the rest of Europe, it was always doomed to return to Mud Hut, where it remains to this very day.